The air was still heavy with the bitter tang of smoke, even weeks after the fire had reduced the once cheerful little home to a skeleton of charred beams and blackened memories. The sun rose quietly each morning, casting golden rays over the yew. Scorched remains, but there was no one to open the red door anymore. No laughter from the porch, no hum of morning coffee brewing in the kitchen, no rustling of newspapers or clink of dog food in a ceramic bowl. Only silence. Silence and the slow, aching breaths of an old Labrador retriever who lay curled beside the burned-out porch steps, waiting. His name was Rusty. Once his fur had been the warm, sun-touched color of autumn leaves. Now it was streaked with gray, his movements slower, more deliberate, as if each one carried the weight of 1,000 yesterdays. His eyes, once full of playful spark and devotion, now reflected only confusion, pain, and something deeper. Hope tethered to heartbreak. He didn't understand what had happened that night. All he knew was that everything he loved had vanished in the chaos of smoke, sirens, and screaming. That night had started like any other. Rusty had been curled on the living room rug, drifting into a peaceful nap, the smell of lasagna from dinner still lingering in the air. Little Emma had giggled while brushing her doll's hair beside him, and Mr. Thompson had fallen asleep in the recliner with the remote still in his hand. Mrs. Thompson had been humming a lullaby in the kitchen, wiping down the counters, the glow of home wrapped around them like a warm blanket. Then came the spark. No one knew if it was faulty wiring or an unattended candle, but within minutes, the house had been swallowed in flames. Smoke filled the rooms like a living monster, choking out air and light. Rusty had barked wildly, running in circles as Emma screamed. He remembered the panic, the fear in Mrs. Thompson's voice as she tried to gather her daughter and call for help. Someone had flung open the back door. He didn't know who, and in the chaos, he'd been pushed out. The door slammed shut behind him, and the last thing he heard was Emma calling his name. Then came the explosion. A window burst, flames shooting out like angry tongues. Rusty had tried to go back. He scratched at the door, barked until his voice cracked, but the heat drove him back. The fire trucks arrived, but by then, it was too late. The house had collapsed inward, smothering the memories and warmth it once held. They took everyone away. That night, Emma, her parents, the firefighters, the neighbors who had gathered. No one thought to look for the old dog who had been left outside in the confusion. Maybe they assumed he'd run. Maybe they simply forgot. But Rusty stayed. Days passed. He curled up beside the scorched front step, guarding the ruins like a silent sentinel. Rain poured once, cold and relentless, soaking him to the bone. He didn't move. The wind howled through the shattered skeleton of the house, but Rusty remained, eyes fixed on the street, ears perked for a familiar engine hum. A set of footsteps, a voice that would say, "There you are, Rusty boy, let's go home." But no one came. The neighborhood changed around him. Curious children on bikes passed by and whispered, "That's the dog from the fire." Some threw him scraps of food, others kept their distance. A woman once tried to coax him into her car, offering treats and a blanket. Rusty had stared at her, polite but unyielding, before returning to his spot beside the ashes. He didn't want anyone else. He didn't need warm beds or soft words. He needed them, his family. Every day was the same. He'd rise with the sun, stretch his aging limbs, then settle in his usual spot near the porch that no longer existed. Sometimes he'd sniff around the rubble, nudging pieces of wood or burned cloth with his nose, perhaps hoping to find something, a scent, a toy, a clue. Once he found Emma's melted hairbrush, blackened and twisted. He licked it gently, then lay beside it for hours. There were moments when his hope faltered, nights when the cold bit too hard or the hunger gnawed too deep. But each morning he reminded himself they had to come back. They loved him. They wouldn't leave him forever. Perhaps they were just waiting for someone to say it was safe. Maybe they couldn't find him yet. Maybe they were hurt too. So he waited. Loyalty was carved into his bones. It was who he was. One afternoon, a mail carrier paused nearby, setting a package down across the street. She looked over, eyes softening. "Hey, old fella," she murmured, stepping closer. Rusty lifted his head, ears twitching. For a second, his heart leapt. Was it Mrs. Thompson? But no, the scent was wrong. Still, he didn't growl or retreat. He simply looked, eyes heavy with longing. "You're still here," she whispered, crouching a few feet away. "You poor thing." She pulled a sandwich from her bag and gently slid it across the sidewalk. Rusty sniffed it but didn't eat. He was hungry, yes, but not for food. He was starving for home. As night fell again, the sky painted itself in soft purples and silvers. The stars blinked awake, and Rusty curled beside the stairs, nose tucked beneath his paw. In the distance, a train horn sounded and he stirred, lifting his head in hope. His tail thumped once. False alarm. Still, he waited. And as the wind rustled through the remains of the house, carrying with it the faintest scent of lavender from the garden that used to bloom near the front window, Rusty sighed. He dreamed of Emma's laugh, of Mr. Thompson's strong hands ruffling his ears, of Mrs. Thompson humming while scratching behind his collar. In his dreams, the fire had never come. The house still stood. The door still opened every morning, and someone always called his name. It was on a chilly Thursday morning when she saw him for the first time. Really saw him. Maggie Simmons had passed by the burned-down house many times before, always with a heavy heart and a quickened pace. The sight of the ruins, crumbling, walls blackened by flame, windows shattered like broken promises, always stirred something deep inside her. Grief, perhaps, for a family she never met. But that morning, she noticed something different. A slow movement, a rise and fall of fur, tucked near what used to be the porch. She pulled her car over without thinking. There, lying so still he could have been mistaken for part of the debris, was a dog. An old Labrador retriever with eyes like faded amber glass, clouded slightly by age but unmistakably alert. He didn't move when she approached. He only watched as though measuring her intentions, not with fear but with the weary skepticism of someone who had been waiting too long and seen too little kindness. Maggie crouched a few feet away, brushing a lock of chestnut hair behind her ear. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. "You live here?" The moment the words left her mouth, she felt foolish. Of course he didn't live here. No one did. But something in the way he rested his chin against the ashes told her that, in his heart, he belonged here. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a granola bar, crinkly wrapper and all. "Not exactly gourmet," she muttered, tearing it open. Rusty lifted his head, sniffed the air cautiously, but made no move to get up. Still, she saw his nose twitch. He was hungry. He was always hungry. Gently, Maggie broke the bar in half and placed it a few feet away. "I won't hurt you," she promised, backing away slowly. Rusty waited until she was at a safe distance before dragging himself up. His limbs were stiff, one paw dragging slightly, but he made it to the food and ate in slow, deliberate bites. That was the beginning. Maggie returned the next day, and the day after. Each time she brought something new. A soft blanket, a bowl of clean water, bits of chicken and rice in Tupperware. She never pushed. She never reached out to pet him, never tried to take him away. She just sat nearby, sipping tea from her thermos, and reading aloud from the novel tucked in her bag. "Page 42, she'd say with a smile. "You're behind on the plot, mister." Rusty never understood the words, but the tone was gentle, comforting. He came to expect it. The sound of her car pulling up was no longer a warning. It was a whisper of hope. Maggie couldn't explain why she kept coming. She had a dog of her own once, a scruffy terrier named Jojo who passed away 3 years ago, after 15 long, loyal years. Maybe it was guilt, maybe it was love, displaced and looking for a new home. Or maybe she just couldn't bear the thought of this old soul spending another night alone in a graveyard of memories. One morning, Maggie brought a collar, just a simple red one, with no tags, no frills. She didn't try to put it on him, she simply laid it beside his water bowl and waited. Rusty eyed it cautiously. To him, collars meant family, belonging. He nudged it once with his nose, then lay down beside it. Maggie took that as a yes. She asked around the neighborhood. Most people knew of the dog who wouldn't leave the ruins. Some called animal control. Others shook their heads. He's been waiting weeks, they'd say. Nobody ever came back. One woman remembered the family. They moved in a few years ago. Sweet people. The little girl, Emma, I think, she loved that dog more than anything. After the fire, they disappeared. Hospital, maybe. Or moved in with relatives. No one really knows. It haunted Maggie. The idea of a dog so loyal he stayed rooted in the rubble while the rest of the world forgot. She tried to track them down. Checked. With shelters, local news archives, even asked a friend who worked at a nearby vet clinic. But every lead ended in silence. No reports, no updates. It was like the Thompsons had vanished with the smoke. Back at the ruins, Rusty's condition was slowly deteriorating. The cold nights made his joints ache. His ribs began to show through his thinning fur. Still, he waited. Sometimes he'd perk up at the sound of a car door, his ears lifting in tired hope, only to droop again when it wasn't them. Maggie knew she had to do something more. She brought a small doghouse and set it near the spot where he always lay. It was nothing fancy, just a wooden shelter with a thick padded bed and a fleece blanket. Rusty sniffed it cautiously, circled once, then stepped inside. That night, for the first time since the fire, he slept under a roof. "I know it's not your home," she whispered, watching from her car. "But it's something." She left a note in a plastic sleeve nailed to the burned remains of the mailbox. It read, "If anyone is looking for the dog from this house, he's still here. He hasn't stopped waiting. I've been feeding him and checking on him every day. Please call me. Maggie, 555-019-4827. She didn't know if it would help. She just couldn't shake the feeling that someone out there needed to know he was still waiting, that despite the flames, the wreckage, the loneliness, Rusty hadn't given up, and neither had she. As the weeks passed, Maggie and Rusty fell into a quiet rhythm. She arrived every morning and again in the evening. Sometimes they just sat in silence, the kind of silence that healed rather than hurt. Other times she'd tell him stories about Jojo, about her garden, about her little brother who used to be afraid of dogs until a golden retriever licked his face clean. Rusty listened with his eyes closed, as if every word stitched a thread back into his torn heart. But Maggie knew he was still waiting for them. Not for her. She was a stranger with a kind smile and warm food, but his heart belonged to the little girl with pigtails and the voice that used to say, "Come here, Rusty, let's play." One evening, just as the sky turned lavender and the first stars began to peek out, Maggie sat on the ground beside him. She sighed, wrapping her arms around her knees. "I don't know how much longer you can do this," she whispered. "But I promise if they come back, I'll make sure they find you." Rusty turned his head toward her, his tired eyes locking onto hers. In that moment, he believed her. The morning sun broke through the clouds with an eerie softness, casting long shadows across the remains of the burned house. Dew clung to the tips of what was once a thriving lawn, now reduced to scorched soil and twisted metal. Rusty stirred, slowly inside the wooden shelter Maggie had brought, his movements sluggish, his body tired. Each sunrise seemed to come a little slower, and each breath a little heavier. Yet still he woke with the same hope that had fueled him for weeks. Maggie arrived just after sunrise. Her small hatchback pulled up and came to a slow stop in front of the property. She stepped out with a thermos in one hand and a tote bag in the other, her boots crunching over gravel and broken glass. As always, Rusty perked up at the sound of her approach, though his tail thumped only once today, the motion slow and feeble. "Morning, sweet boy," she said, crouching near the doghouse. "I brought you some turkey today. Spoiled you a little." Her voice was cheerful, but her eyes betrayed her worry. Each day, Rusty seemed just a bit more worn down. His fur was losing its luster, his frame a bit more fragile. She knew time was catching up with him. Rusty sniffed the food, took a few bites, then laid his head back down, resting it on the edge of the blanket she had carefully tucked into his shelter. Maggie reached out gently and placed her hand just an inch from his paw. He didn't pull away. In fact, he moved ever so slightly closer, his paw brushing hers in what felt like silent gratitude. The house behind them was no longer a home. The skeletal remains of its wooden frame stood like forgotten gravestones, scorched beams jutting toward the sky. Maggie had never known the family who once lived there, but she had tried her best to imagine their lives. In her mind's eye, she saw the little girl with wind-blown hair and muddy shoes chasing Rusty through the backyard, laughter echoing against the fence. She imagined Sunday dinners, birthday candles, and quiet evenings spent cuddled on the couch with their beloved dog nestled between them. Now there was only silence and Rusty. Later that morning, Maggie decided to explore the ruins a little closer. She was careful, stepping only where the ground seemed solid, avoiding the weakened floorboards and nails that jutted out like angry teeth. Rusty watched her, from his spot near the edge of the yard, his gaze tracking her every movement. He didn't bark. He never barked anymore. Among the ash and crumbling furniture, Maggie found something half buried beneath a collapsed shelf. A small, scorched picture frame. She brushed away the soot with her sleeve and gasped softly. The glass was cracked, but the photograph inside had somehow survived. It showed a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, smiling broadly with her arms wrapped tightly around Rusty's neck. His fur was cleaner then, fuller. His eyes sparkled with youth and joy. Maggie stared at the picture for a long moment, her throat tightening. This was the proof she had been hoping for. This was the family he belonged to. She took the frame gently and brought it back to Rusty kneeling beside him. "Is this her?" she whispered, showing him the image. Rusty's head lifted slightly. He stared at the photo, and for a flicker of a second, something lit up in his eyes. Recognition, a memory, love that refused to fade. Maggie felt tears sting her eyes. "We'll find her," she said, voice trembling. "I swear to you we'll find her." With new resolve, Maggie posted the photo on every social media page she could think of. Local community groups, lost pet forums, even the town's official website. She included a brief message. "Does anyone know this girl or this dog? He's been waiting at the ruins of his home for weeks. Please, if you recognize them, help us bring them back together." The response was immediate. Comments poured in. People were moved by Rusty's story, sharing it across towns, counties, even states. Messages of support flooded in. "Bless you for helping him. I remember the fire, it was awful. That dog is a hero." But no one knew where the family was. Maggie sat in her car late into the evening, scrolling through the replies, her heart sinking with each dead end. The photo had stirred hearts, but not the right one. She glanced up and saw Rusty, still lying in the same place, still facing the house. The wind tugged at his fur, and he didn't flinch. She stepped out and walked over, her coat wrapped tightly around her. She knelt beside him, running her hand gently over his head. "I don't know why they haven't come," she whispered. "Maybe they can't. Maybe they don't even know you're here. But you deserve more than this." Rusty let out a low, tired breath and pressed his head into her lap. Maggie bit back a sob and leaned over him, shielding him from the cold breeze. She didn't go home that night. She stayed there, sitting beside him under the stars, humming old lullabies her mother used to sing. The moon passed overhead, silent and watchful, as if honoring the bond between a woman with a bleeding heart and a dog with unwavering faith. At dawn, Maggie stirred awake, stiff and aching, but she found Rusty still asleep, his breathing even and calm. She smiled through her exhaustion and rose carefully, laying a fresh blanket over him before starting her car. "I'll be back soon," she promised. As she drove away, a small sedan passed her in the opposite direction, unfamiliar, but slow-moving, the driver's eyes scanning the neighborhood. Maggie didn't notice. She had a new plan for the day, to visit the local news station. Rusty's story needed to be told, not just online, but on every screen in the county. She didn't know that at that very moment, the sedan had stopped in front of the ruins, and inside it, A little girl pressed her face to the window, her hands trembling as she stared at the familiar doghouse. Her voice broke the silence like a crack of thunder. "Mommy." "That's Rusty." The wind was beginning to pick up, brushing through the hollow remains of the house and whistling softly through broken beams like a quiet sigh from the past. Rusty lay curled inside his wooden shelter, body still but eyes open. He had long since stopped reacting to every sound. Too many times he had been fooled by a passing car, a distant voice, a pair of footsteps that never turned toward him. Hope hadn't died in him. It had simply grown quiet, curled deep within his chest like a candle fighting the draft. But then, a car door slammed. It wasn't like the others. This one didn't shut in a hurry or drive away quickly. It closed gently, and then there was a pause. Rusty's ears twitched. Then another door. Then small feet hit the pavement. And then, faint at first, as if the wind had carried it from a dream, came the voice. "Rusty?" It wasn't loud. It wasn't even certain. But it hit Rusty like lightning. His head snapped up, eyes wide, his ears perked. He slowly pulled himself up, his legs shaky but filled with sudden purpose. The girl was standing at the edge of the blackened yard, her shoes crunching on burnt earth, her arms limp by her side. Her face was older than in the photo Maggie had found, but her eyes were unmistakable. Soft, brown, full of hope and fear. "Rusty?" She called again, her voice catching. He took one slow step forward, then another. Then she ran. Maggie had just returned, parking across the street, arms full of flyers she didn't need anymore. She stepped out and froze as she saw what was unfolding. The little girl, now perhaps 11, was kneeling in the ashes, arms wide, tears streaking down her cheeks. "Rusty," she sobbed. The old dog broke into a wobbly run, legs trembling, breath ragged, but his heart propelling him faster than he had moved in weeks. With a choked whine, he crashed into her arms, his body trembling with every bit of relief, love, and memory it held. She wrapped herself around him, burying her face in his fur. "You waited for me. You waited." Her voice cracked and her mother stood behind her, hand over her mouth, eyes wet. Rusty licked the tears from the girl's cheek, his tail moving slowly but steadily now, as though it too remembered how to be joyful. His whole body shook, not from weakness but from something deeper, something sacred. For the first time in weeks, he didn't look at the house. He looked only at her. Maggie approached slowly, not wanting to intrude but unable to stop the tears streaming down her own face. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The moment had unfolded just as it needed to, pure, unscripted, and perfect. The mother finally stepped forward, kneeling beside them both. She stroked Rusty's back with trembling fingers, her lips parted as though she couldn't believe he was real. "He survived," she whispered. "He stayed." Maggie found her voice, hoarse and full. "He never left, not for a single day." The woman turned to Maggie, eyes wide with emotion. "We didn't know. After the fire, we thought he had run. They wouldn't let us back. Everything happened so fast, we lost everything and..." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, boy." Rusty responded with a gentle grunt, his eyes soft as he pressed his head into the girl's chest again. If he carried any bitterness, it didn't show. All that remained was love. Neighbors began to gather. Some had seen the viral post. Others had simply watched Rusty for weeks and wanted to know how it all ended. And here it was, happening right before them. A reunion that seemed like it had come straight out of a fairy tale, only more raw, more real. One neighbor, an older man with a cane, murmured, "I never thought I'd see the day." Another whispered to Maggie, "You did this. You gave him a chance." But Maggie shook her head gently. He gave himself that chance. He just needed someone to believe in him. Rusty was finally guided to the car, the little girl walking beside him, never taking her hand off his fur. She had grown so much in the years since the fire, but the bond she shared with Rusty had never shrunk. It had merely waited, like him, through time and silence and heartache. As they reached the car, the girl turned back to Maggie. "Thank you," she said through a small, grateful smile. "I'm Emily." Maggie smiled warmly. "I'm Maggie, and he's a miracle." Rusty paused at the open car door. He looked back once, not at the house, but at Maggie. She stepped forward, kneeling down and cupping his face. "You did it, old man. You found your way home." His eyes met hers one last time, full of something ancient and deep. Thanks, trust, and maybe a little goodbye. Emily gently guided him into the back seat and climbed in beside him. As the door closed, Rusty rested his head in her lap, eyes closing, safe again. Maggie stood in the quiet street as the car pulled away, leaving behind only ash, wind, and the faint scent of healing. She didn't cry again. Not this time. Because, in a world that often forgets, Rusty had remembered. He remembered love. He remembered home. And because he waited, because he believed, the universe gave it all back to him. The drive home was silent at first. Not an uncomfortable silence, but one steeped in awe. Emily sat in the back seat, cradling Rusty's head gently in her lap, as though he were made of something fragile and holy. Her fingers moved through his fur, slow and deliberate, as if trying to memorize the feel of him all over again. She whispered little things to him, memories, apologies, dreams she had kept folded in her heart. Rusty, eyes half closed, let it all wash over him. His ears twitched now and then at the sound of her voice, and his tail gave the occasional, tired wag. Her mother kept glancing at the rearview mirror, eyes brimming, catching glimpses of her daughter smiling again, really smiling for the first time in what felt like years. So much had changed since the fire. They had moved into a small rental apartment on the other side of town. There had been counseling sessions and night terrors. Emily had stopped asking about Rusty after the first few months, when everyone gently told her he was gone. They had thought it was better that way, cleaner. But grief doesn't vanish when it's hidden. It burrows. And now the ache that had settled deep in Emily's soul had finally found release. As they pulled into the apartment complex, Emily looked around nervously. "Do you think he'll be okay here? It's not like the old place." Her mother reached over and squeezed her hand. "Home isn't the building, sweetheart, it's where love lives, and you're his home." That night, Rusty was given a warm bath, a soft blanket, and more food than he could finish. His body was still worn. There were signs of arthritis in his joints, scars under his fur, and an old stiffness to his gait. But he curled up at the foot of Emily's bed with a contentment no medicine could have offered. Emily refused to sleep without him by her side, and when the nightmares came, as they sometimes still did, it was Rusty's presence that calmed her breathing. His heartbeat became her lullaby. In the days that followed, news of the reunion spread beyond their neighborhood. Maggie had posted an update, sharing photos of Emily and Rusty reunited, and the internet embraced their story like a long-lost friend. Messages poured in from across the world, people thanking them for reminding humanity that loyalty still existed, that love could wait even in ruins, and that sometimes the impossible simply needed time. Rusty became a symbol, a living embodiment of devotion. But to Emily, he wasn't a headline or a heartwarming story. He was Rusty, her Rusty, the dog who used to sneak socks out of laundry baskets, who once chased butterflies across their backyard, who had waited for her when the world burned and nothing else had survived. One afternoon, a small ceremony was held in their community park. The local animal rescue, moved by Rusty's story, had decided to honor him as an ambassador for senior pet adoption. Maggie was there too, standing quietly at the back, smiling as Rusty was presented with a shiny medallion shaped like a heart. Emily stood proudly beside him, her hand resting on his neck. When the applause faded and most people drifted away, Emily walked over to Maggie. "You found him," she said softly. Maggie shook her head. "He found me. I just listened." There was a pause between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Then Emily asked, Why did you help him for so long? You didn't even know us." Maggie smiled, eyes kind. "Because once, someone helped me when I felt forgotten." Rusty reminded me what it means to be faithful. He deserved someone in his corner. That evening, as the sky turned lavender and gold, Emily and Rusty sat together on the balcony of their small apartment. She had brought out a little rug for him, a bowl of water, and a biscuit he was only mildly interested in. Mostly, he was interested in her. How she hummed to herself while drawing in her sketchbook, how she looked up every few minutes just to make sure he was still there. She turned her sketch pad toward him. "See? It's us. You're waiting by the house and I'm running to you." It wasn't perfectly drawn, but it was perfect in spirit. The way she had captured Rusty's eyes, the hopeful droop of his ears, it made something tighten in her chest. She reached over and stroked the top of his head. "You're gonna be okay now. We both are." But time, as kind as it had been in granting this reunion, was still time. Rusty grew slower as the weeks passed. Some days he didn't want to walk far. His appetite faded a little. He began sleeping more. Emily noticed. She never said anything out loud, but she spent even more time with him, telling stories, bringing him his favorite blanket, humming songs from their old life. One particularly soft morning when the sun was just peeking in through the blinds, Emily woke to find Rusty lying beside her, as usual. But something was different. His breathing was quiet. Too quiet. She sat up slowly, heart already cracking. "Rusty?" she whispered. No response, just stillness. She touched him gently, then more firmly. His body was warm, peaceful. His head rested on his paws like he had simply drifted, off mid-dream. Her breath hitched and then the tears came, hot, heavy, unstoppable. She wrapped herself around him, burying her face in his fur, rocking slowly. "Thank you," she sobbed. "Thank you for waiting for me." Her mother came in moments later and fell to her knees. They held each other, surrounded by the quiet of a goodbye that needed no words. Rusty was buried in a sunny corner of the local park, under a tree that bloomed white blossoms each spring. Emily placed a small stone at the base, etched with his name, and below it the words, "He waited. He loved. He came home." In time, the ache softened. Emily grew older. Life moved forward, as it always does. But Rusty's story never faded. Not from her heart. Not from her memories, not from the world that had watched a faithful dog teach humanity what love without limits looked like. Because love waits, even in ashes, even when no one else believes. And sometimes, just sometimes, love gets to come home.